Good evening. Hello, everyone. May 23rd, I've been thinking about the development of religion itself, how that is changing. Um, on a theme we've touched on earlier, Spengler once said that all art is born religious. I take that very seriously. I wonder what that means for art and architecture. I consider architecture to be a craft, but a craft that all craft is artistic and comes from often similar places of inspiration as art itself. And there's been a lot of talk lately about religiosity. There's the idea that with what used to be called mainstream religion kind of becoming drained out of society in a way. John Lennon was right in 1966, I think, when he was asked about what do you think of Christianity. He said something along the lines of Christianity will wither away, it will vanish and shrink. We're more popular than Jesus. And he got in a lot of trouble for that, but in a sense he was correct. And he didn't particularly think that that was a great thing, but he was just observing the simple fact that if you looked at daily churchgoers versus people who bought Beatles records, that this was an interesting popularity contest. And there has been, all you have to do is look at the religiosity of Beatles fans, of Grateful Dead fans, of things like that. And now, even in some very serious commentators about society and religion, that this whole idea of social justice, this and that this has become a new kind of religion. I think what's very important about it is that it's not a religion. If it was some type of newfangled religion like Scientology, or even a somewhat organic religion like the people who follow Star Wars and have their rituals of dressing up and talking about the all-powerful force. This politicized religiosity, which in some senses is a new form of Stoicism, really. It's not a very nice form of Stoicism, unfortunately. I think on the other side of this, on the moderate, I wouldn't say left or right, I would say extremist versus moderate, that you have on the other side of the extremists, on the moderate side, you have something akin to Stoicism, where people are focused on civitas, of a type of civic focus. On the other side of that, you have the desire to tear something down. I don't think that we should immediately be negative about that. People are wanting to tear things down for a reason. That reason being the structures that we are all accustomed to seeing. 2 points on this. The structures that we have all been accustomed to seeing have stopped being responsive. They have stopped functioning as well as they have in the past. So 2 things there. There's the motivation to tear them down. And secondly, if these structures were as strong as they were even in recent decades, you would not see nearly the kinds of things that you have now. I think for example, all of the Weather Underground problems that you had in the late 60s and early 70s. It used to be maybe 3 years ago that people would point to the 60s and say, yes, it was much worse then, and riots now. Oh, we're nowhere near that. I think we've crossed that Rubicon. I think we can safely say that. And there's very much the idea. There we go. That distracts less from the trees. I love that. vest that we use for on-site things, but you can see the trees better now. Uh, there's the So there has been a weakening of the institutions, and you see this a lot. It's happening across academia, it's happening across government, and I think this happens in any society when there is a system whose goal becomes the system itself rather than the objectives of the system. And it opens itself up to a kind of criticism, to a type of dismantling. So there is a religiosity, an organic religiosity, the idea of people seeking inspiration, people seeking justice. And honestly, part of the problem now is that you have a lot of people who think that they are the arbiters of this justice. A lot of these people may happen to be atheists or agnostics, but that doesn't give them a monopoly on being the arbiters of, supreme will. You have plenty of fundamentalists in any time, in any challenging time in history, who will believe the same thing for religious reasons rather than for atheistic reasons. So the thumbnail for this was Stonehenge. I did that deliberately. When I think of the kind of religiosity that we're seeing, this is coming in coincidence with a desire to build things that are in accordance with something greater. And we haven't seen that for a good long time. And this is reaching a kind of popular consciousness, but it's been in the architectural consciousness from way back. I've done a lot of work on the origins of the Bauhaus, on this kind of organic expressionist tendency in 20th century architecture, which I think has been greatly misunderstood. A lot of that is in my old podcast. But the original Bauhaus manifesto, before they were asking for lots of money from industry, before the Dessau era, when they lost their government funding, during that earlier time, there was the original Bauhaus manifesto, which had on it a picture of a cathedral. And they were trying to imagine, what are the cathedrals of the future? The great yearning towards the spiritual that was, they thought, should be emerging in the then new 20th century. This was the very early days of the Bauhaus. We're now 100 years ago. So, and even before then, in the Deutsche Werkbund Congress of either 1909 or 1910, Hermann Mothesius and others were talking about how they were looking at the industrial works of America, and they called it monumental. And they said that things like concrete grain silos, and they said not since the grand works of Egypt have we seen the monumental be expressed with such force. So it's not just people on YouTube or people who go to Peru and sing at holes in the wall to test the resonance. It's not just these people who are interested in Egypt. There are very serious architects who are interested in Egypt and what Egypt meant to our society. And I think that is for good reason. We're not only do we have a desire to understand the connection of the cosmological to the terrestrial and vice versa, but it is happening, whatever is happening in such a way is aligning our understanding with the Egyptian metaphysic. I think Schwaller de Lubitz, in his Temple in Man and other works, was an early example of this. And we saw that being connected to the forerunners of the Bauhaus, to the Bauhaus itself in some ways. And now, especially in the popular consciousness, people go... Stonehenge was there for thousands of years with no one going there. And now people religiously go there, however they understand it, as a kind of inclusive celebration of the solstice. and equinoxes. The idea that whatever a person believes, the cosmos, the stars, are something worthy of our sense of wonder, worthy of being honored, respected, and questioned. It is sometimes said that there are no atheists in foxholes. I wonder, along that same line of logic, true or not, it makes an important point. Along those same lines of logic, are there atheists among stargazers? And in addition, we should be honest about the feeling of this, is that there is not only wonder and mystery, but fear. There is fear in looking at the sky, especially as we are not used to it. We are used to the very few stars being able to be seen. Here in Pasadena, lovely place that it is, I can pretty much only see Orion, Sirius, and the brighter planets, that being Jupiter, Saturn on a clear night, Venus in the evenings, and Mars. And then when I was getting ready to move here, I was coming out to see Dana from Iowa and was driving. I was very excited, so I was driving through the night, and I stopped just to rest for a moment in the middle of nowhere in some state park in New Mexico, in that beautiful, wonderful landscape. It was very dark at night, and I looked up in the sky, and it was a clear night. I could see everything. I could see the Milky Way, all these bright, bright stars, and I looked up at the sky. And maybe some of you feel like this when you look at the ocean. Brian Wilson felt this way looking at the ocean, but when you look at the ocean, you can often get this weird sense of dread. This has been written about by Burke and also Kant, described as the sublime. People use that word in a much different way now. They'll say, oh God, that cheesecake is sublime. Well, okay, you have the dread of your own mortality when you eat the cheesecake. Maybe they do. But sublime is used as an antipode to the beautiful. Sublime means full of terror and impressive. It makes you feel, it's something that doesn't actually threaten you, that kind of makes you aware of your own tininess, of your own mortality. And to look at the stars, at these, for all we can relate to, for all practical purposes, eternal, certainly more eternal than us, even though we are pretty sure they have a beginning and an end now. But these things that through thousands of years, they change only regularly, the great rhythms of precession in the sky, there's an even stronger sense of dread that I had looking up at the stars than I had staring at the ocean. And to me, looking at the ocean is a little disturbing. It's incredibly deep. You don't know what's in it. The idea of the depth that you don't understand, but you're seeing the surface. Seeing the stars, it felt, especially when you're not used to it, seeing so many out there, it is this presence of dread mixed with beauty. And these are the feelings in which the sense of, there's an old book, I wish I could remember the name of the German philosopher who wrote it, it's called The Idea of the Holy. He talked about the sense of creature feeling. I don't think he used the word sublime, but he was talking about experiences where a person, you feel like a creature. You're something that lives, then dies, something that is somehow, whatever you believe, created in some way. And something that is grand induces this creature feeling. And what religion really is, by his definition, is the social structure of interpreting, understanding, living with, hopefully benefiting from that kind of feeling, coming to terms with that creature feeling. We're reconnecting to this as a culture. I think it's incredibly important in many ways to be honest about what this is. A lot of people want a return to the older things. And this is a natural human reaction. As a society starts to run out of gas, as the changes in the world are such that the structures can't keep up with it, several things happen. You'll have one group of people people are looking around for something that works again. A lot of people will be looking back. Spengler calls this the second religiousness. But at the end of a world system, you have the old religion come back. At the end of the new kingdom, Old Kingdom art, Old Kingdom literature was reasserted. In the Middle Kingdom, it was a little weird and a little different, influenced by Libya, influenced by the Canaanites, influenced by Mesopotamia. In the New Kingdom, it was very much a revival of the old religions. In the days of Rome, you had the first beginnings of Neoplatonism, although that was an edge case. I guess you could call that a pseudomorphosis, the new in the clothes of the old. I would definitely say that. But you also had something like the Pantheon, where they were taking the old gods and asserting them again. You had these crazy overwrought temples that get more and more intense and more large as people try to grab onto that. If you go to Paestum in Italy, which is some of the older Greek architecture there, some of the oldest Greek stone architecture in the world, but you can see that the stuff that's newer is bigger, more impressive, that they were trying to really amplify the signal of connecting to the old stuff. And now we are seeing a second religiousness with a reemphasis of the Judeo-Christian, specifically the brand of Judeo-Christian religious feeling that was prominent in Ashkenazic Judaism and in Western Christianity. Eastern Christianity and Mizrahi Judaism, that was something else. That went through its kind of second religiousness earlier, because that was an earlier phase of world system and civilizational expression. Other people will not fall in the pattern of wanting to go back to the old. They will go look for something unfamiliar. This is the kind of eclecticism that you see. This is the early expression of the new age, and you saw a lot of this very early on in California, because there were, and in some ways this begins as a second religiousness and goes into this kind of exoticism. You had a second religiousness being expressed by Chinese, Japanese, and Korean immigrants to the West Coast, a kind of intensifying of their traditional religion. Just like on the East Coast of the United States, you had the Germans and the English and the Italians being more religious than the people who stayed, because they were kind of amplifying their culture that they brought along with them. But you had a second religiousness of the very Eastern religions, of Buddhism specifically. And then you had a bunch of, European descended people who were looking for something else. They felt that the Western tradition no longer spoke to them. They thought, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe this will be better. I'll look into that. And there's a lot of that. There's, it's like the Germanic kings who would have a statue of Thor, a statue of Zeus, and a crucifix, and they would have all of them, just to cover their bets. Or maybe they were genuinely curious. And it's a similar type of motive. So you'll have a lot of people now who will have, a statue of Buddha, along with, a book by Confucius, along with a big poster of Shiva. But this all, to them, makes sense, because they're looking for some type of spiritual nourishment, but they're poking their finger into anything that will seem to taste right to them. Both of these approaches, the idea that the West must not die, which is ridiculous, the West must transform, is really what's happening. And that is unfruitful. It is also unfruitful to have this kind of eclectic New Age approach. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that I believe that if I am lucky enough to have grandchildren, they will explain to me what my religion is. And I think it's important to be very honest. Right now, I would say that I sincerely believe in God, very much so. I come from a Christian tradition. And right now, I am continuing to practice traditions of Judaism, which I think are very important and wonderful. And I am looking for a way to, in my own way, to find what is speaking to me. And with my family and home situation such as it is, to be connected in that way. And there is inspiration in this, in art and architecture. And to touch on that again, on the Stonehenge type theme, I think it's very important for us to think about what do we want to leave to future generations. I think there are some people who have the idea, they've wrapped themselves in the idea that, well, it doesn't matter when I'm dead. I'm just going to be dead by then, and it's better if other people just do what they want instead of me imposing it on them. And I think that's a very sad thing to believe. To believe that your energy continues and goes on is a wonderful thing. The idea to plant a tree, Tim Pool has referenced this, to plant a tree in whose shade you know that you will not sit. So to someone who's descended from, half of me is descended from Celtic peoples, English, but nonetheless Celtic English. That's the proof. I'm not blonde. But it's, you have the, we should be asking ourselves, what do we want to leave? What do we want to strive to understand, to leave to the future to understand better? I think that a lot of that went into Stonehenge. Stonehenge changed over time. And when I was there, when I visited it, I had an odd feeling that it was the end of something. It was people going through a kind of second religiousness. I don't base this off of anything but just a vague and very odd inner feeling I had. It felt sad. Stonehenge felt very sad, and it's not the kind of romantic, melancholic, visions of things past. No, it felt like the people who made it were sad. I think that the people who made it didn't come from there. They didn't come from southern England. And they were remembering something. They wanted something to not be forgotten. They were remembering something older. And I think a lot of the Egyptian monuments have to do with that. The Egyptians themselves say that these things did. That's why they had things like the king's lists, which went way, 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 way back. Even as back as 36,000 years, if you count them all the way to the beginning, which coincidentally lines up. This is another thing. Coincidentally lines up, coincidentally or not, with the geological time period where there was a peak and an end of a wet Sahara period. So it was a period of intense climate change that begins the Egyptian king's list. I don't think that's insignificant. I think it's quite possible that Egyptian oral tradition did go back that far. For God's sake, the oral tradition of the Indians in South Asia preserves the Brahmin chants. There was a Dutch sociologist, a Dutch linguist, who was trying to figure out what was going on with that. And he finally got permission to record these very sacred old things that they usually didn't share with people, but the Brahmin mantras. And he tried to figure out, using linguistic and computer analysis, what was that? The closest thing that he could find was bird calls. And his scientific opinion was that this was human ritual that predated human language, that this was the beginning of human language, that humans would imitate birds and sing to each other of sacred things, that the patterns come from bird calls. One of the ways that what Randall Carlson refers to as the language of the birds is, preserved in the Brahmin mantras, and may be appropriate to say tatvamasi. In that way are you. Where is the salt dissolved in the cup? In that way are you. Translation of that was brought up by that very same linguist. It's an old Brahmin story. So I think even though we don't know where we're going, it's very important to understand that I think in order for our art to be healthy, our architecture to be healthy, our society to be healthy, it's important to not impose the restrictions of an old set. It's also important to not destroy the structures of the old thing. A pseudomorphosis, a false shaping is important, it's healthy, it's good. The early Gothic cathedrals contained Romanesque elements. There was a great revival of Roman style, which is why it's called Romanesque, before the Gothic broke through. They were reasserting the Roman as they understood it before the new thing happened. That's a necessary phase. So if we go through a new understanding of Judaism, if we go through a new understanding of Christianity, perhaps a new understanding of Islam, I think some people are pushing for that, especially the people who believe that Petra was the real Mecca. It's one of the touchstones about who's being reform-minded there. It's important to move through those things to our new understandings. And I am of the firm opinion that that is the most direct route to meaningful art, to meaningful architecture, in so much as there's such a grand desire to understand the old monumental architecture that connected to the stars. I think it is high time that we start building it ourselves. We're capable of building new monuments in this way. I think that when people die now, we should consider that. Start there. Start small and humble. What would you like the mausoleum of your family to be like? It might not even be a mausoleum, but what kind of thing do you want to construct to preserve family memory? And the Romans would have funerary markers, but they would also have things in their homes, ancestor rooms, where they would have the wax impressions of the faces on the wall. I think it's really sad and weird that a lot of these frescoes from Pompeii and Herculaneum, they're not explained in this context. I'm lucky enough to have listened to Dan Carlin, where he talks about the ancestor room and the red line and everything. And so you can see that clearly these frescoes were meant to frame with the red line going around a room and columns and little fluffy winged cherubs holding the rope, the thread, and bunting around it, that this is how they did it. And there would have been a mask of an ancestor right on that place. The museums never mentioned this. I think they should, that this is something that would have framed a memorial to an ancestor. And the children would have been expected to go into that room and see it and recite the poetry about what those ancestors did. And do that for their parents and do that for family and for business that would come visit. And that was a thing that was done in Rome, of honoring where you come from and honoring your ancestors. But what do we do for that? We're going through a time of great change now, and in some senses of willful forgetting, of willful destruction. It's past time to step beyond the dismantling. And it's now time to think about, what are we leaving for the future? There will be a future. Even if climate change is horrible, it's going to be bad for the world, but there will be humans, unless we nuke ourselves or something. We didn't do that yet. Climate change is very bad. It's going to disrupt agriculture. It's going to disrupt coastal settlements. We don't know exactly how bad, but it's going to be something. But let's think about, instead of panicking, first, yes, let's think about solutions. Let's think about living mindfully and living compassionately for ourselves in the future. But also, how do we want to be remembered? How do we want to preserve memory? What memory do we want to preserve? What knowledge do we want to send on? What do we want to build? These are very important questions. I don't have all the answers, but this is where we're beginning. A little bit of a personal update. It was my 41st birthday a couple days ago, May 20th. And it was a fantastic birthday. Dana surprised me with a visit she made. She watched for weeks to get the reservations because the museum was opening, but it was selling tickets so quickly. She took me as a surprise to the Getty, not the Getty Museum, the Getty Villa. So the old museum, which is now a different museum, and they have it filled with Assyrian. I have photos which I'll be uploading in various places. The Egyptian mummy portraits and the amazing Assyrian reliefs from the waiting room to the throne room of Ashurbanipal, the famous king and queen of Elam scene that Dan Carlin talks about. I got to see that in person. That was quite moving to see that, as well as the Greek and Roman statues. That was incredible to see. She also gave me this truly beautiful Peterson pipe I've been enjoying very much. It's a system pipe, beautiful, beautiful piano black. So thank you, Dana. It's a truly wonderful birthday. We're doing well on things. We're designing ADUs for people, accessory dwelling units. That's where you turn a garage into, or build something new. In this case, it's a garage, and turning that into a rental place. And I'm really enjoying how that's going and making a very small space feel very big. I love doing interior spatial designing. So yeah, we're doing that. And yeah, I'm going to be continuing to upload these every week. If anyone has recommendations, I think the business analysis I had last week was certainly less interesting to most people than my usual topics. That was on my mind for that week. If you liked this, let me know. If you disliked this, let me know. Be sure to like and subscribe. Comment below if you have any questions. If you have any topics you'd like me to cover, please say so. We've hit the time of day for those reflections here. Well, I think I'm going to be repeating that. So everyone, have a fantastic week. And thank you so much for watching.